you have, in the last years, done a lot of work in two big areas. One is healthcare, and you've shared a great example. And the other area is education. And it's funny because when we think innovation, we don't think of education, much less disruptive innovation. Why don't you frame the challenge and the opportunity that you have in applying disruptive innovation to education?
The reason we got into it was some of the leading education innovators in America came at me and said, at their core, the reasons why our schools can't improve are problems of managing innovation. And so they asked me to join with them to examine education through the lenses of my research on innovation, rather than trying to study the schools statistically to figure out how to make the schools better. So that's been the game that we've been engaged in for about 10 years. And we reached a couple of conclusions that I just had never thought about before. And one is that there is a business model that has evolved in education whose roots are in the late 1800s, when manufacturing technology evolved to the point that you made products in big batches. That batch manufacturing model, which was so low cost and so efficient relative to prior technologies, got imported into our schools. And the idea was just bring in the students by batch, stick them all in a room, and lecture to them. And that was actually a good technology for that time. But what we've learned now is that there are different types of intelligence. In fact, there are probably 8 different types of intelligence. And you should never call anybody smart or dumb, because all of us are quite smart in a couple of types of intelligence and quite clueless in a couple of other types. And so when you're a teacher in front of a big batch of students, you teach in a way that's consistent with your type of intelligence. What it means is 7/8 of the students out there aren't learning at all, or they're learning in a very inefficient way. And so, for example, when I was taking physics in high school, my physics teacher, Mr. Steed, taught physics by writing equations on the board. And my best friend, Robert Graves, he could see these equations and just visualize how the whole universe operated. And I would see the equations and simply begin to pray that I would be able to memorize them long enough to pass the exam, after which I would just totally, wipe my brain clean. And now I realize that the reason Rob got it and I didn't get it wasn't that he was smarter, but he has a type of intelligence called mathematical symbolic intelligence. And my type is spatial. I can see patterns in things. I'm really very good at that. Well, the problem was that Mr. Steed's brain was wired like Rob Graves's brain. Mm-hmm. And so the two of them just sang to each other all period long. And occasionally Mr. Steed would look at me and he couldn't get why I couldn't get it. And I just have a different type of brain. Well, how do you solve this problem? That you've got one teacher in front whose own brain is wired to the dominant type of intelligence in that industry. Or another type of intelligence is verbal linguistic intelligence. And so we teach spelling to the verbal linguistic mind. It's taught by a verbal linguistic mind to a verbal linguistic mind. And Rob Graves over here, with a mathematical symbolic mind, he can't get spelling. Not only can he not spell, he doesn't care that he can't spell, right? And so this is the problem, is that we need to be able to customize the way we teach to fit the way our brains are genetically or in early childhood wired to learn. And the only way to do that is to migrate the delivery of the content to software and not obligate teachers to deliver the content. There's so many other things teachers can do, but the reason why we need to migrate it to software is it can be readily customized. So when Clay is learning physics, he learns it with diagrams and patterns. And Rob learns it with math. And other people learn it with story problems, you know. But we can all learn it in very profound and useful ways, but it has to fit the way our brains are wired to learn. And then migrating the instruction to the computer is actually quite disruptive to the teacher. Now, in the end, the teachers are better off because they tutor students rather than lecture to them. But what it requires, the theory of disruption says, is don't try to force the computer into the same classroom system that the teacher is teaching in, because she can only use the computer in ways that support the existing model of instruction. But rather, you've got to deploy computer-based learning against non-consumption, where you have schools that don't have the scope to offer the class, or where you're having students who are homeschooled and so on. And then little by little, computer-based learning will get better and better and draw courses one by one from conventional instruction to the new. And when that happens, then students will be able to learn in ways that their brains are wired to learn. Teachers will spend their time tutoring individual students, not lecturing and controlling the crowds. And it'll be a much better outcome, but we have to do it right.
Ya volvemos con HSM Specials, solo por Management TV.
En Coca-Cola estamos especialmente orgullosos y desde luego convencidos de que trabajar pensando en las comunidades a las que servimos es lo más importante. Por eso es una verdadera satisfacción haber recibido por 10 años consecutivos el CEMEFI, un galardón que no solamente nos indica que estamos siguiendo el buen camino, sino que nos dice qué es lo que debemos hacer para alcanzar ese objetivo de ser sustentables y promover la sustentabilidad en la sociedad en la que operamos. Por eso, bajo nuestra plataforma Viviendo Positivamente, nos estamos enfocando muy concretamente en dos áreas: el medio ambiente y el bienestar de las comunidades a las que servimos. Animamos a las demás compañías que todavía no han decidido seguir esta ruta y desde luego felicitamos a todas aquellas que ya lo han hecho y que como nosotros han sido reconocidas por su responsabilidad social, a que lo hagan. No se trata solamente de sentirse bien, es también una ventaja competitiva. Así que ánimo a todos y muchísimas gracias por este reconocimiento.
Estamos viendo HSM Specials, solo por Management TV.
Why don't we finish by telling us as parents, all of us, what we can do at home, one or two things in line with that thought that can enormously improve our educational skills.
You know, Eduardo, one of the most shocking things that I learned is that a child's basic level of intellectual capacity is almost locked in by age 3. There's just some remarkable research on this by some academics in the middle part of the United States. What they did was they stuck TV cameras in homes where there was a new infant born. And they just recorded the interaction of the parents with these infants who were too young to even speak yet. But they observed that some parents would engage their infant children in eye-to-eye, face-to-face, sophisticated adult conversation even before the children could speak. And the questions, the conversation was filled with questions like, do you think you'll be as beautiful as your mother when you grow up? And, you know, things like that. And they called that kind of communication language dancing. Then they observed that there were other homes where the children were just kind of put off to the side, put in front of a TV. And the kind of language, they called it, it was utilitarian, like, eat this, let's change your diaper, don't cry, time to go to bed, you know. And so they then went through these tapes and figured out that for the parents whose children engaged in language dancing, by the time the children were 3, they had heard 48 million words. And the ones whose parents were in this uncommunicative mode, they had only heard 8 million words. So a factor of 6 difference. They then followed these children through to, they're now about 12 years old, and watched how they have done in school. And there is a perfect correlation between their performance in school and the degree to which the parents engaged in sophisticated face-to-face adult conversation before the children could speak. And now we know, as neuroscience is teaching us how brains develop, neurons fire off across synapses in response to a stimulus. And what's going on in these little babies' brains as their parents engage in this is they're developing patterns of synaptic connections in their heads that are very sophisticated, And so it's what's sobering about it is, and one other thing, no correlation with parental education level or income. And so you have very wealthy, highly educated investment banker parents who are so occupied with their careers that they just put the child over to the side so that they can engage themselves in sophisticated conversation. And you have low-income, undereducated parents who in fact do engage their children. And so has nothing to do with parental, there's a correlation, but the causal mechanism is this. And so what's scary is that in the pursuit of money and wealth, more and more parents spend more and more of their time pursuing their careers, put the children in a daycare center. In a daycare center, all the children hear is the maintenance language. Don't do this, eat this, let's change your diaper. In the very early years, when their cognitive capacity is forged, more and more of our parents are kind of delegating that to professional daycare operators and so on. And the best, so our cognitive capacity is essentially in place by age 3. The best our schools can do is cause those children not to fall farther behind. So it's a long way of saying there is a lot that parents can do in the home to assure their children's success.
Definitely, that's an invitation for all of us to really change the way we interact with kids below the age of 3.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Clayton, for being
welcome,
with
Eduardo.
us, and I hope to have you soon again with new ideas, new thoughts, new stories to share with all of us.
Well, I'll look forward to it. Thank you very much.
And thank you for being with Management TV. See you soon.